Evening, everybody, and welcome to another week of Behind the Mic here on Amateur Sports TV. This week, we have a really special episode for you as we are joined by special guest Jerry Howarth. Thrilled to be joined by the legendary former radio voice of the Toronto Blue Jays. For 36 years, Jerry was part of the soundtrack of summer in Toronto and the background to many of the greatest moments in Blue Jays history for the fans of the Blue Jays across the country. He joined the Blue Jays in 1981, joining alongside the original voice of the Blue Jays, Tom Cheek, and together for more than 20 years, they formed the iconic Tom and Jerry pairing on Blue Jays radio, and would of course be the soundtrack to the team's two World Series championships in 92 and 1993. And of course, in most recent times, Jerry was the radio voice for the 2015 and 2016 playoff appearances by Jose Bautista and that Blue Jays crew. Today, Jerry will walk us through some of his journey in sportscasting, how he got into it, and a little bit of his journey on his way to the bigs, and of course, some stories from his time in Toronto. So you just sit back, relax, and enjoy Behind the Mic on Amateur Sports TV with Jerry Howarth. And before we throw to our first break and bring in Jerry, we'll remind you that you can find all of our ASTV episodes at amateursports.tv and on the social media networks on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. So we'll take a quick break here and we'll be back. And on the other side, I'll be joined by Jerry Howarth. Welcome back to Behind the Mic on Amateur Sports TV, joined now for this very special episode by Toronto Blue Jays radio legend Jerry Howarth. Jerry, thanks so much for coming on and welcome.
You are most welcome, Jonathan. It's good to see you, and we go back a long way in our history, and I'm so proud of you on where you were, where you are now, and how you enjoy every moment.
I appreciate that, Jerry. Yeah, you and I met back when I was just starting out in the business. I believe I was 16 years old or so when you came out and spoke at the Okotoks Dogs Winter Banquets. And it's been a fun road ever since then. We appreciate you coming on, spending some time with us. It's been a little bit since you've had the opportunity to speak to your friends in Blue Jays Nation on a forum like this. So we'll start out with just a quick update on how is Jerry Howarth these days?
Well, I'm doing very well, and I might share this too with your audience right now. When you talk about you were 16 when we met. Well, next month, Jonathan, I turned 75. And I can remember right about the time I was 16 or 17, I began to enjoy the moment because you're not promised tomorrow. And because of that, I've been able to fully absorb the moments every day. And I have a competitive gene, as I like to call it. So I try to be the best that I can be. And overall, I want that message passed on to all your listeners too, and viewers, because we're only as good as the moment we're in. And if you enjoy that moment and then move to the next one and the next one, at the end of the night, you put your head on the pillow and you say, thank you. I appreciate the day. Hopefully there'll be another one like this tomorrow. That's what becomes a very successful life in your own heart. And you've done that. And that's why I'm so proud of you. And I've been able to do it myself as well. And yes, there was a time I was 16 years old.
That feels like a long time ago now. But yes, I've been Been fortunate and blessed to be on the receiving end of some of those talks from yourself, and couldn't be more appreciative and thankful of that. And look forward to bringing some of that to our audience today. You stepped away from the booth before the 2018 season. I believe it was 2016. There was a cancer scare. You had surgery to take care of that, and then leading into 2018, your health just wasn't, your strength just wasn't there to go through the rigors of a major league season.
That's exactly right. In fact, yesterday was February the 8th, and that marked 3 years to the day that I retired. And I decided to do that too, Jonathan, because I wasn't that healthy. I didn't have the stamina, the drive to continue every day in a profession where a season is marked really by 8 months, and that includes spring training and possibly the playoffs as well. So I just decided after 36 wonderful seasons that it was time to step back and look at life a little bit differently and let others take over. And I think because of my health, I made the right decision. I have no regrets. And those are two of my favorite words as well. No regrets. Go out there and do the best you can. But my cancer's fine. I had prostate cancer surgery and a tumor removed November 22nd, 4+ years ago. And I think too, there you're very appreciative that we live in Toronto, great doctors. Dr. Rob Nam did the surgery, and he's become a great friend of mine too. And that's where you look back and you say, thank you, God, for the years that I had behind the mic. That included 5 in AAA Pacific Coast League. That's a 41-year career that I wouldn't trade for anything. And now in retirement, I've enjoyed my wife of 49 years, our 2 sons who are in their early 40s. We have 3 young grandsons. They're 5, 3, and 3. And I play a lot of duplicate bridge online, 2-hour games every day to satisfy my competitive genes. And at night, my wife, Mary, and I, we watch Apple TV, Netflix, and it's become a very good retirement routine. And honestly, Jonathan, I never thought I would retire. And if I did, I never thought it would be 3 years. So I'm going into my 4th year, and I'm really happy about that.
So obviously, season number 3 away was different. It was different for everybody. But let's go back to those first 2 seasons away from the mic. How difficult was that, not having somewhere to go every single day? And how often did you find yourself back at the ballpark?
That's a very good question. And again, it gets back to, and I'm being completely honest, on February the 8th, when I went in 2018 to see Dave Cadeau, who ran the sports program there at Sportsnet and the broadcast, when I left there having retired, I came home with no regrets. I began to move 100% into another direction. And baseball was my life, but it didn't consume my life. And so I began to look for other things to do to enjoy. Now, when the season began, I began to follow it too. But I'd already had my 36 years of spring training, and in the off season, I coached high school basketball for 25 years, and I did not look back. I still don't to this day. I've been very blessed to take this moment, enjoy it like I am with you here. When we're all through, I'll move into something else later this evening, and I'll continue to go from there. And I say that too because honestly, I don't think you want to look back and say, oh, if I'd have done this or if I would have done that. No, do it to the best of your ability. And then when it's time to move on 100%. And not everybody can do that, but I've been blessed to be able to do that. And it's been very satisfying for me.
So let's go back to kind of set the scene to the foundations of your own career. I guess before we get into you, were there people when you were a young fan? Were there voices that you listened to that got you interested in baseball and interested in a career in sportscasting?
Yes, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I remember when I was 12 years old, the San Francisco Giants moved out from New York. They were the New York Giants, of course, and so the Giants moved to San Francisco, the Dodgers to Los Angeles. And I began to listen to Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons. They were the radio broadcasters for the Giants. And I can vividly recall, and a lot of people talk about this, but I did it, lying in bed at night with the lights out, listening to the Giants on the radio, never dreaming I would become a major league broadcaster, let alone a baseball broadcaster. I can remember to this day lying in bed, lights out, and this kid, Juan Marichal from the Dominican Republic, he started his first ever game with the Giants. He went into the ninth inning with a no-hitter. I'm listening to that on the radio. Clay Dalrymple for the Philadelphia Phillies hit a pitch up the middle of the diamond, a ground ball base hit into center field, the only hit off Juan that day. Those were moments that I began to treasure as a love for baseball, a love for sports. And really with your question there, it all started listening to Russ and Lon. And then I would turn on the radio at night, lying in bed, and across the way were the San Francisco Warriors at that time. And Bill King, who became a great friend of mine, was the broadcaster for the San Francisco Warriors. Later, the Oakland A's for 25 plus years. When I began to hear those broadcasts, it just kind of planted seeds in my mind that, not that I would do that someday, but listen to them, listen how much they enjoy what they do and the passion they have for the game. And I was the beneficiary. I was the listener. And that started really my love for sports. And then later the broadcasting fit in.
And so you went to school, you were a baseball player, and you went to school dreaming to be a writer at first. Talk about your initial ambitions to be a writer and kind of how the seeds to broadcasting were planted.
Yes, well, and I always encourage young broadcasters too, or young people in general, get as much education as you can. So I played high school baseball all year round. I played in the winter leagues, the summer leagues, and it was a wonderful time to play baseball. I really enjoyed it. I didn't really start to academically put myself into a real serious situation until my senior year, when all of a sudden the light went on. There was a Vietnam War coming up that we had read about and heard about. And I thought, Jerry, unless you want to get drafted and go to Vietnam and be part of an infantry unit, you better get yourself ready to go academically. So my senior year in high school, I had all A's except one B. That led to a 4-year run at the University of Santa Clara, which is in the Bay Area, just south of San Francisco, a great Jesuit school of only 3,000. And when I was there, I began to cover the sporting teams for Santa Clara, the Broncos, with the school newspaper, later becoming their sports editor. And all along, Jonathan, I wanted to be a feature writer for Sports Illustrated. That was my goal. But I had some things that I had to do first. Number one was graduate, which I did in 1968 with a degree in economics and a minor in philosophy and theology. And then because I went through ROTC because of Vietnam, I was fortunate to go to Frankfurt, Germany for 2 years as a first lieutenant in the US Army, came back. And then my dad, when I came back, said, I think you should have something to fall back upon. Why don't you go to law school? So I enrolled at Hastings Law School in downtown San Francisco when I came back, which I came back in August of 1970 after 2 years in Germany. And in February, this is where your life takes interesting turns and twists. I'm enjoying my first year in law school. The grades had come out in the winter time in January, and I did very well. But I'd also asked some friends of mine who knew Lou Spadia, the president of the San Francisco 49ers, if they could get in touch with him, if I could, as a longtime 49er fan. My dad was a season ticket holder, and I went to my first game when I was 8 years old. Was there a chance to watch a game on the field, to just hear all the mayhem and the violence and everything that took place in that game? Well, it was about this time, February 9th, I'm in my apartment in San Francisco and the phone rings. I said, hello. And the voice said, is this Jerry Howarth? I said, yes. He said, Jerry, this is Lou Spadia, the president of the San Francisco 49ers. I've heard from everybody but the Pope about you. And I know you want to get down on the field to watch a game, but we can't allow that. It's only for photographers and professional members of the media. And we don't have any jobs here. If you were looking for work, it's a small fraternity. But next Tuesday, if you'd like to come in, I'd like to meet you. Jonathan, when I hung up the phone, I left law school. That night, I typed up on a typewriter. Yes, I had a typewriter. I typed up a letter to the admissions office, which I took in the next day. And the letter basically said, I've decided that I'd like to leave law school for the rest of the semester and do something in the sports world. My heart jumped last night when I got a call from the San Francisco 49ers. If things don't work out, could I have my seat back in the fall, September, and I would re-enroll? And they said yes. And I never went back. I was very fortunate. I found a job at the University of Santa Clara as their first fundraiser. And that began my career in the sports world as opposed to being a lawyer.
And I'll pause there because you said something that I know is a common theme for you. You said my heart jumped, and that is something that you encourage to young sportscasters and everybody, that when your heart wants something, when you get excited about something, you encourage people to go after it.
I do. And that's the best way to put it too. When your heart jumps, that is saying that inside, that's what you want to do. That's truly what you want to do. That's where you want to go. And you don't want to go through life in a job, quote unquote, where after 40 years, you have regrets saying, well, I wish I would have followed my heart. No, follow your heart, because no matter what happens then, you will be doing the right thing. Your body, your mind, everything will react towards something that you love doing. And for me, again, it wasn't broadcasting, it was just sports. I wanted to get into sports in some capacity. So as it turned out, within a month, the University of Santa Clara hired me as a grad from 3 years before. It was now 71. And they hired me to become the first fundraiser in the athletic department. It was called the Bronco Bench. And I did that for 2 years. And during that time, I began to, I asked right in the beginning, this is another story that I will tell. My first year, the Santa Clara football team was playing. And I asked the broadcaster at that time, who was an insurance salesman in San Francisco, and he donated money to become the broadcaster for the Santa Clara Broncos. I said, would it be okay if I joined the broadcast team just to highlight my role as a fundraiser and have people say, Jerry, come on in, let's talk money. He said no. And I asked him a couple times, he said no. And about 2 weeks later at a football game, I didn't think too much about it, but I'm going down the steps at Buckshaw Stadium where the team was playing. He was coming up the steps and he stopped me and he said, Jerry, I know you're disappointed in not being on the broadcast, but he said, you and I have the same problem. And I said, what is that? He said, neither of us have a major league voice. Well, I know he was being sincere. I know he was being honest. And I said, okay, thank you. I continued down the steps and he continued the other way. And Jonathan, here again, that's when my heart jumped and I said, okay, he's just issued me a challenge that I'm going to take. And that night when I got home, I got money and bought a tape recorder and a microphone. And really for the next 2 years, as I raised money for the school, I taped, ironically, no baseball games, but I began to tape all the football and basketball games to just see what that voice was like and what I might do with it from what he had told me. And at that point, after 2 years, people said, Jerry, these tapes are great. You should be on the radio. And that led to my trip to Eugene, Oregon, to Tacoma, Washington, begin my broadcasting career with Tacoma.
Yeah, and you had some great experiences before, of course, your major league time in Tacoma and in Salt Lake City. And added on to that was some time in the WBA and an opportunity with Utah Jazz.
That's exactly right. When I went up to Tacoma, Washington, they hired me as the broadcaster for the Tacoma Twins. And at the same time, Stan Naccarato, who was the general manager, he said, Jerry, go across the street. There's the University of Puget Sound. And Doug MacArthur, who's a good friend of mine, he said, is the athletic director. He does everything and the Loggers football and basketball play-by-play. So he said, go talk to him. So I went over and I visited with Doug and he said, well, let me hear one of your tapes. So I played a little tape of a basketball game at Santa Clara. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, he turned it off and he said, Jerry, I'll tell you what, you raise money for us. You be the fundraiser here that you were at Santa Clara, and I'll let you do all the play-by-play for the years that you're here doing football and basketball. Doug became a great friend of mine. He really opened the door for me as far as a broadcaster. So for 2 straight years, Jonathan, for 24 months, I did football, basketball, and baseball. And that eventually led to going to Salt Lake City, where I helped run the team and broadcast the games at night, another AAA team in Salt Lake. And those were the formative years, the foundation that I built for 5 years. And then I felt I was ready to broadcast Major League games if that break ever came.
Okay, so let's get into Blue Jays a little bit, and I think the only place we can really start is your partners, and of course your iconic longtime partner, Tom Cheek, who was part of the crew that welcomed you to the major leagues. What stands out to you first about working all those years with the legendary Tom Cheek?
Well, what really stood out for me was how he welcomed me and just said, Jerry, here's a tape recorder. You go get the interviews and we'll do this together. And Tom, it was never about Tom. Tom was a very good broadcaster and we worked so well together because neither of us had any kind of condescending attitude or they should do this or they should do that. No, we both realized that we never played the game professionally. We were broadcasters. We wanted to inform and entertain the crowd, the audience, and we did that. But Tom had a good heart, and eventually, within a very short time, Tom and Jerry became iconic up in Toronto. And I would tell people when I grew up, I watched Tom and Jerry, the cartoon on television. And sure enough, with his build, he was about 6'4". He was the big cat, and I was a little mouse running around. And Tom and Jerry fit perfectly. But it was a wonderful opportunity to really work with someone that you were very comfortable with. We did the games together. But when the broadcasts were over, we went our separate ways. And I like that too. And that allowed me to then do some other things. He did other things. But when we came together from day one, it was Tom and Jerry. It was very close. And it was with one purpose in mind, broadcast for the audience, not for ourselves. And that got away from an ego trip and really made it worthwhile.
And so he was the day one voice who had been there since the inception of the club in 1977. You came along in 81, and by 1992, of course, the first World Series. And you have a great story that really, in my mind, displays what you're all about. 1992, it was your inning as you two would share time. It was on track to be your inning to call the end of the 1992 World Series, and you passed it off to Tom. Why?
Well, when I got to Toronto, as you said, he had done game one with Early Wynn. And I was fortunate to replace the Hall of Fame pitcher after 5 years. So now time goes on, and we're in the 92 World Series, and it's game 6. The Blue Jays lead 3-2. It's in Atlanta. And it's the bottom of the 9th inning, and it's 2-1 Blue Jays. And Tom Henke, the closer, and really when people ask me who's your favorite all-time Blue Jay, I tell them Tom Henke, on and off the field. Tom came on, and it was one of the very few times he gave up a run, and now it's 2-2. So Tom called the 10th inning, and nothing happened. Now it goes to the bottom. Now it goes to the top of the 11th inning, and that was my inning because after the 10th inning, Tom and I went every other inning. So in the top of the 11th inning, 2 on, 2 outs, I'm at the mic, and Charlie Liebrandt throws a 3-2 changeup down and away, and Dave Winfield whacks one over third down the line for a 2-run double, and the Blue Jays take the lead. Now it's the break between innings, and I kind of looked to my right, and I saw Tom kind of slumping back in his chair. And I said to myself, Jerry, do the right thing. He's been there since day one. He had never missed a game. In fact, he went on to broadcast 4,306 consecutive games. Let's do the right thing. So when we came back, I was at the mic and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I've had the pleasure of calling Dave Winfield's 2-run double for the 4-2 lead. And now here in the bottom of the 11th inning to take you the rest of the way, here's my partner, Tom Cheek. And Tom just sat up. He was so happy. He went to the microphone. Thank you, Jerry. And he called that bottom of the 11th inning and the final bunted ball by Otis Nixon. Nixon bunts up along first, and Tom called it. Timlin to Carter, and the Blue Jays are World Series champions. And honestly, I was happier for him that he called it than had I called it.
And of course, he would have another chance the very next year with Joe Carter winning it at home. And I want to talk about some of your other partners, though, as well as a number of your main partners had their own dynamic and their own story to them. I want to talk, of course, about another person who I've had the chance to meet and spend a little bit of time with. Alan Ashby spent 6 years with you, the former Houston Astro, and he's back in Houston on the TV side. What were the 6 seasons like with Alan?
Well, I really enjoyed Alan from a number of standpoints. Number one, he was a Toronto Blue Jay. So he was there in year one, 1977. He also caught for 17 years. And at that particular point in my career, I realized that really, in my opinion, the best broadcasters, especially former players, were former catchers. Why? Because they ran the game. They saw the game completely differently than people who were out on the field looking in. Pitchers were so dependent upon catchers, and catchers had to call games for them. They had to be so unselfish. And Alan, to catch 17 years, he had to do all of that, very unselfish, and work hard and make it all happen. Plus, as we began to work together, I saw how articulate he was as well. And for a partnership, really, and I enjoyed, sadly, and I've just might pause right here, Tom Cheek, he passed away October the 5th, October the 9th in 2005 from malignant brain tumor. And so the year before, that's when they said, Jerry, we want you to lead the broadcast, and we're going to have some partners come in for you. And so within a couple of years working with young Warren Saku, a Canadian, that's when Alan Ashby came in, and Tom sadly had passed away. But for me as a broadcaster in the lead seat, it was not about me. You would call the play, and then I would back up and defer to Alan, and he would then make some great comments about why that happened, what this pitcher was thinking, what that infielder might have done in this situation. And we were together for 6 years, and I enjoyed all those broadcasts, not for anything more than the insight that Alan provided for the audience. And I would get that feedback, and Alan said this, and Alan said that, and that's what you want to do. If you're the lead broadcaster and you highlight your partner, the broadcast gets highlighted, and that's what you want.
And in your last partner was Joe Siddle. There's a great story to how he joined your crew. But something that caught my eye when I visited in the booth with you one time was I was sitting behind you, and you had a small TV monitor right in front of you, and I'm watching you look down at the monitor and then look up quickly every time. And I asked you, Jerry, how often do you call off a monitor? You said every pitch. And in your book, which we'll plug here in a minute, you noted that there was a time when you went away from calling every pitch from a monitor to calling it looking down on the field, and that was with Joe. Why was that?
Well, I should mention, first of all, I broadcast for years, and the first few years I was broadcasting from up in the booth, not looking at any monitor. And our pitcher, Jimmy Key, one day said, Jerry, are you guessing up there in the booth? I've been charting these games, and a couple of pitches, I'm wondering, are you just guessing? And Jimmy said that out of the goodness of his heart. We were very good friends, and he wanted me to be the best that I could be. And I said to him, well, I am. And he said, well, maybe what you could do is what we do here. We chart the game, but we take the pitch off the center field camera off every pitch. We can see it released by the pitcher, how it ends up over the plate. And why don't you try that? So I started to do that, and it worked. I saw myself being able to look at the monitor, call the pitches with great precision. And then as the ball was put in play, for the most part, I would see exactly where the ball was, moving my eyes from the monitor to the field. And the very few times that didn't happen, I would just see the field, and the players would tell me where the ball was, like a little pop-up into shallow right field. If I didn't see that initially, I'd look, the second baseman's going back, and popped up into shallow right field. Well, that gave me those few pitches back, so I was pretty much 100%. But to answer your question, when Joe came along, I began to realize he was special. Joe Siddle really is one of the most insightful and bright and intuitive broadcasters that I was ever a partner with. So I said to myself, Jerry, don't you call the pitches, even though you can do it. Let Joe do it. So that's when I moved from the monitor back upstairs, so to speak. I generalized the pitches, or I would just say whatever it was and pause a breaking ball. And then Joe would say, Jerry, that slider did this and did that, and it broke in, broke away. And again, Joe provided so many wonderful insights for the fans. And part of that was letting him take the pitch and develop it rather than me call that pitch. And again, you do the right thing and you highlight your partner. In that case, that highlighted the broadcast, and I was so happy to do that.
All right, we're going to take our first break here on Behind the Mic. We'll come back and talk a little bit more stories about those first Blue Jays teams and get into a little bit more of the current group, and of course a lot more about Jerry. We'll step aside. We'll be right back with more of Jerry Howarth here on Behind the Mic on Amateur Sports TV. And welcome back to Behind the Mic on Amateur Sports TV. Jonathan Hodgson along with your friend and mine, Jerry Howarth. Jerry, thanks again for spending some time with us. And we were talking between the two of us in the break about something that you said once upon a time to me that has been so influential for me. And it's a game changer, but it's simple. And you said to me in, I believe it was 2015, when the Blue Jays were taking on the Orioles before the game, we sat on the field and you said to me, John, do three things. Thank God for every opportunity, do your best with it, and enjoy every moment of it. If you do that, you'll be great. And for me, as time has gone on and gotten older, really started to sink in and has been a game changer for me. So I want to take the opportunity to thank you for that, and I know that's a message that you give to everybody.
Well, I do, and I really think it all starts with the fact that you and I are blessed. And that's where it begins. You know, you thank God for all of your opportunities. And then the second thing is, all we can do is our best, but we want to make sure we do our best. And if you do your best, let the results take care of themselves. I've always been a big believer in that. You do your best and then you have no regrets. And one of my favorite words too is joy. And when I send emails out to people or whatever, and I spell the word enjoy or enjoyable or enjoying, I always capitalize J-O-Y. Because I want people to know joy is what life is all about. And with those three things, this is why I'm so proud of you, because not only did you hear it, but you applied it. A lot of people hear those things and they go in one ear, out the other, but you did it. And then when you do that, your life is full of joy because you're doing your best, meaning that you're working as hard as you can to be the best you can be. But you also know it's not about you. It's God giving you talent and abilities that are your own, and then you make the most of those, just the way I do.
Absolutely. So let's talk about a joyful moment for you. We talked about, of course, the 1992 and 93 back-to-back World Series. 1994 was not such a joyful moment for baseball with the strike, but for you, there was a great moment in 1994, becoming a Canadian citizen.
That is so true. I remember to this day with my wife and two boys, there were 52 of us in the room representing 13 different countries. And the citizenship judge was Gina Godfrey, whose husband, Paul Godfrey, was the former mayor here, Metro chairman, just a wonderful person with so many leadership positions and capabilities. And when we were sworn in, we did it really for our kids so that in the event that something would have happened and we would have moved and they were under 18, they could stay here and make this their home and native land, so to speak. And so we did that for Ben and Joe, and it was a wonderful moment. And this really is what led to eventually my signature coming on the broadcast saying, "Hello, friends," because everybody in Canada became my friends. I was part of them. We were Canadian citizens. It wasn't just hi, everybody, or hello, everyone. No. Hello, friends, and welcome to Blue Jays baseball. And the funny thing is, as Gina Godfrey left the room, I looked over and as loud as I could, and I said, "And there she goes." And everybody got a big kick out of my home run call because Gina delivered the home run there to make us citizens, and it was a special moment.
So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to talk a little bit about the current team with you and get your thoughts as a highly invested fan now of the current group, of course, making their return to the playoffs last year and the shortened season with the expanded format. What are your first thoughts when you look at what the team has going on right now?
Well, I see some great youth and sons of Hall of Famers, and this is what it's all about too, to have great young players, position players who can hit, field, hit with power. I also look too at the fact that in 92 and 93, the Blue Jays had, I think, the best pitching in the major leagues. That was definitely evident in 1992 with the starting rotation. When the games went 6 innings and the Blue Jays had the lead, it was game over. And then in 1993, Pat Gillick, who's in the Hall of Fame, he couldn't acquire Randy Johnson to add to that pitching. That was the one trade he wanted to make with Seattle, but they wanted too much. So instead, he went the other way, brought in Rickey Henderson, and even with very good pitching, they just out-hit and out-slugged the opponents, including that 15-14 win in the World Series against Philadelphia, and they won their back-to-back World Series. So this year's team, I think, does need more pitching. I'm not sure exactly where that's going to come. The starting pitching is good. I think if you're going to win the lion's share of the games, you have to have good starting pitching and not wear down that bullpen. But the nice thing is to see Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero and Cavan Biggio and Lourdes Gurriel and talented young players that the fans will identify with, they already have identified with. And if they can get some pitching and win those 4-3 games and 3-2 games, then they've got an opportunity to get back to the playoffs again.
And I go back to the 1980s teams that 85 won the division, but it took them quite some time to go from good team to playoffs to champions. And in today's fan culture, there's a lot more impatience, a lot more of just go get everybody and win it this year. And even the reaction to George Springer, there was a lot of, oh, they're going to do it this year. And that comes the impatience with pitching because there appears to be a little bit of a lack there still. How are there any lines that you can draw between where they're at now and where the Blue Jays were in those 80s of transitioning from good club into ready to win a championship?
Yes, and I think you might be able to draw a parallel with the 1984 team, because that was the team that really began to put it all together, and they won 89 games. Now, the next year, they won 99 games, and that was still a club record. But 83, I would say probably 83, 84 were the kind of the barometer years of what was to come, good things that were to come. And Pat Gillick, of course, was the architect there, and he began to add to that group, and one thing led to another, and they had some real good starting pitching. The hitting was there, the defense was there. So I think overall, when you look at 83 and 84, I think 1983 might have been the first year that they led, that they began an 11-year streak of playing better than 500 ball, culminated with the 92 and 93 World Series. So this year's team that last year got to the playoffs, I think tasted a little bit about what the playoffs are all about. And once you get that little bit of taste, it kind of motivates you even more. Hey, been there, done that. Let's do it some more. And I think that'll be the fun part to watch in spring training in the early part of the season, that carryover, to see that drive and energy, because these players realize how close they are toward not only a playoff berth, but doing it for a number of years in a row to finally reach the pinnacle.
That's good stuff. And in our first block, you referenced indirectly a couple of your catchphrases, and I wanted to get into a little bit more shop talk for the sportscasters out there. And it's something that you and I have talked about, but I think it's great for the sportscasting audience out there. And I'll take the opportunity to plug your book here, Hello Friends. Came out a couple of years ago, and got my advanced copy still sitting on my display case.
I love that.
And in the book, you talk about how your catchphrases evolve. The hello friends, there she goes, call it two, all those kind of things. Are those something that you set out to have catchphrases, or do those just kind of evolve naturally?
I always tell broadcasters, do not try to come up with catchphrases. Don't try to manufacture something. Be yourself, be natural. In my 5 years of AAA baseball, 2 in Tacoma and 3 in Salt Lake, I never had any catchphrases. My whole goal was to become as fundamentally sound as possible. Then when I got to Toronto, I think it was 1983, my second season, we were at Exhibition Stadium, and I think it was 83. I can remember the day for sure. It was a day game, probably like a Sunday. And a Blue Jay in the third or fourth inning, those were my first 2 innings, hit a home run. And I'd never had a home run call, never desired one. And as it left the yard and went into the left field bleachers, I said, there it goes. I said to myself, okay, Jerry, maybe that's a home run call in the future. Let's see. Well, wouldn't you know it, an inning later, another Blue Jay hit a home run. And this time it broke a tie, gave the Blue Jays the lead. And with great joy and enthusiasm, I said, and there she goes. And all of a sudden I said to myself, that's my home run call. I'm going with that because it's so true to me. I love the enthusiasm. I love the shortness of it. There are 3 words, there she goes. And so that was really my first ever kind of signature call. And then as time went on, my dad came to Toronto about that same year, 1983. And he said, Jerry, one thing you might do is when the Blue Jays score first, you might have them in flight. And I said, Dad, I'm going to do that for you. From now on, when I'm at the mic and the Blue Jays score first, their first run, I'm going to say, and the Blue Jays are in flight, leading 1-0, or whatever the score happened to be. Call it 2, a double play. That was my own. I just came up with it one time, and I said to myself, I like that. Call it 2. It's short and sweet. And Jonathan, all the calls that you want to make, you want to have them short, sweet, concise. And there were probably a few others too that come to mind. Hello Friends, as I said, became really mine after we became Canadian citizens, and I love being a friend to everybody in Canada. People would come up to me and say, Jerry, you are a part of our family. We listen to you all the time on the radio, and I love that. And so that's how they come about. Let them be spontaneous and don't try to manufacture them.
And how about the big moments? And I think first back to Jose Bautista's home run against Texas, the end of the 53-minute, or the punctuation of the 53-minute inning. And of course, the way fandom is nowadays, after the fact, the bat flip became the story. But the thing that I take from that was listening to your radio call of it. You called it, there she goes, and then nothing for almost a minute. How important is that, do you think? And of course, not everybody has the major league playoff crowd to help them. But how important is that to you, to let the game carry itself and not try to be part of the moment?
I would say it's the most important part of my career regarding being on radio and have the fans who are listening be at the game. And that means they're part of the fans cheering. And because it was a 53-minute inning, and because it involved an umpire's call, and it also involved fans throwing water bottles and beer bottles on the field, and that's what took so long. It's the 7th inning, and now all of a sudden it's 3-3, and Jose hits that 3-run home run. There was a lot of anger in the crowd at the umpire and the whole situation. And so once I said there's a fly ball hit the deep left field, yes, sir. And then it was very dramatic. There she goes. And I just sat back and enjoyed the crowd noise myself for almost that 1 minute. And finally, when Jose was in the dugout and being swarmed by his teammates, I said, and the Blue Jays take the lead 6-3 over the Texas Rangers. That was really my favorite call, other than the Dave Winfield call in the Game 6 World Series in Atlanta. But it was also a moment where the fans were right there with me, listening. They were right there in the ballpark. And that's where you don't want to ever talk over that.
Absolutely. So along the way in your career, you've had some accolades come your way. The 2012 Jack Graney Award from the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, the 2003 Sports Media Canada Award, Etobicoke Sports Hall of Fame, all those kind of things. How do you look at those individual accolades that have come your way? What place do those have for you?
Well, first of all, it's very humbling. You don't establish a career for awards. And if I did not win one award in my career, the award that I had was being me and enjoying every moment and calling the games. That might sound a little bit trite, but it's true. Then secondly, when you do receive the awards, I've always felt too, in anything, whether it's a compliment or giving something to someone, the best two words are thank you. And then once you say thank you, then you can enjoy all that went into that. And there are a few other Hall of Fames too. At the University of Santa Clara a couple of years ago, they inducted me into their Santa Clara University Sports Hall of Fame as a broadcaster and someone who 6 months before had gone out there and celebrated with my class, my 50th class reunion. I mean, what a great joy that was too, and a pleasure to be a part of that. And so those are great honors, and I'm happy to have them, dealing with those with great humility too. And if there are more to come, great. But if not, they're all extra and a bonus. And honestly, Jonathan, and I say this too, being here with you on this show is as great a reward as anything that I've ever received, because, and I say that with you and other people I've been with, I see how hard you have worked to get to this point and to do the job you're doing and doing it so well. And that's an honor for me in and of itself to be a part of that. And,
going back to one thing that I already brought up, but the example you used with that three thing advice you gave me was that day you pulled Devin Travis out of the clubhouse to do an interview with me. So you said, hey, thank God that you got to interview Devin Travis today. And I did that this morning. I've known you for 12 or 13 years, and I email with you back and forth. And but when I hear you on the radio or your calls being put on TV, that's just Jerry to me. And so this morning, when I knew I had a recording with you, I was just sitting here at my computer going through some of your old calls, and it was, wow, I get to sit down for an hour with Jerry Howarth, and so that's never lost on me. But I do want to highlight, and as well with that, a few days ago, my colleague here at ASTV, John Easthope, did an interview with Chris Cuthbert, the legendary hockey voice, Hockey Night in Canada. And I was messaging with him after the fact. I listened to his show and talked to him about it. And after we talked about it, I said, isn't that a cool moment when you hear that kind of voice and then you realize you're the one on the other end? Because I've had that experience for many years now. But I wanted to highlight some of the other people that are part of the Jerry Howarth tree that have been a part of both of our lives. People like Barry Davis, who's been on this show before and talked about your influence early in his career. Donnie Barnes, we had on last week, has been a good friend of mine. How proud are you of people like them who have gone on to great success themselves?
Well, very proud of them. And I might just pause here too. Chris Cuthbert is one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. You talk about no ego. For me, he has none. He's out there for everybody else. And so I'm glad that you had a chance to interview him and talk to him, because he's as nice as they come. But overall, when you look at Donnie Barnes and Barry Davis and others like that, you're happy to share some thoughts that you have to maybe that they can use, but then you're even happier that they used them and they went on and applied that. And they worked very hard. And Barry's had a couple of setbacks too, where he's been let go from this job and let go from that job. Well, what you do is you pick yourself up and say, okay, where do we go from here? I've often said, and I could go back in my career too, that where you're let go or you're quote fired or end quote, you're let go, you're fired. Sometimes getting fired or let go is the best thing that could happen to you, because after 24 hours, you say, okay, that was unexpected. Where do we go from here? And instead of just kind of saying, oh, they shouldn't have done that or whatever. No, you can't look back. You then pick yourself up and go. And I think Barry is so good at that. Donnie Barnes, for me, he's a major league broadcaster. I'd love to see him have that opportunity. It hasn't been there for him. But does he give in or give up? No, he keeps working at it to be the best that he can be. And that's all we can do in these situations. And that's where, too, that first thing is you thank God for everything. And I thank God for the few breaks I had to get where I did. But I also said, too, Jonathan, when I was in Salt Lake City, had I not gotten a major league break to broadcast, I would have been the best major league broadcaster to never broadcast a game. And I honestly feel that way. But luckily, I got my break. And that's where you pull for others to get that same break.
Absolutely. And you referenced earlier in the visit that you've coached high school basketball. You coached for 25 years, I believe. And of course, we alluded to earlier your experience in the WBA and with the Utah Jazz. What place does basketball have in your life, and what was that experience being Coach Howarth away from the ballpark?
Well, it was terrific. And I want to put the big picture first. My wife, Mary, and I just celebrated our 49th wedding anniversary. So in all the years that I broadcast, not only in Toronto, but in Salt Lake and Tacoma, and the 25 years I coached basketball, I did have quite a good marriage too. It wasn't just like I was doing this by myself. And so Mary and I have enjoyed our 2 boys and our 3 young grandsons. But to answer your question, what I really enjoyed about basketball, and I started to coach my boys in the house leagues here in Etobicoke, where we live right here in one of the suburbs of Toronto. And that later led to coaching middle school for a number of years and then high school basketball. What I really enjoyed most was it's not what you coach, it's what you teach. It's what you emphasize. And for me, I always emphasize academics. If I had players on my team, the first thing we talked about was academics. If you didn't have academics, you weren't on the team very long. If you were a great basketball player, you still had to have academics. And I wanted everybody from middle school to go to high school. And the high school teams that I had for years, I wanted them to go to junior colleges, community colleges, universities, any and all college experiences, university experiences that they could get. So for those 25 years, I was really a mentor. We did very well too. We played for a couple of city championships, and for the most part, we always had winning years and we were in the playoffs, but it wasn't about that. It was more, I wanted players to leave and say, now I'm going to go to university. Now I'm going to go to education. I'm going to get some kind of degree or more education to make myself even better than I am. I know I can play basketball. The coach helped me do that. And the other thing that we always emphasized was defense. And championships are won with defense. And every practice, we devoted so much time to team defense. And when we won games, 63-60 and 57-54 and 48-43, it was all about defense. And I took great pride in that, and so did our players.
Absolutely. And okay, I'll edit that out. My mind just went blank for a second.
Mine always goes blank.
Oh, hate that.
No, that's okay.
Oh yeah, there we go. Oh, that's good. And so I wanted to go back in the booth with you for a second, and something that I like to bring up with sportscasters is talking about those moments where if you've had a moment on air that maybe didn't go so well, or maybe not as you planned it, because none of us are going to have a perfect show every day. It might not ever happen. Did you ever have that moment? Did you ever have a call, a night, an interview that didn't go as expected? And how did you move on from that? And what did you take from it?
Actually, I had one when I was in Tacoma, my first 2 years. I think it was our second year, and our center fielder was Randy Beach. And Bobby Jones came up for Spokane, and he lined the ball into left center field. Well, I was at the mic, of course. I did all the innings in those 2 years. And I said, Randy Beach runs over, he's running, dives headlong, and he can't make the catch. The ball rolls to the wall. And Randy was lying on his stomach. He didn't move. He was winded. He had just hit the ground the wrong way. And I said, Bobby Jones pulls into second with a double as Randy Beach lies prostrate in left center field. And as soon as I said it, I said, Jerry, you forgot the R. He's lying prostrate in center field, not prostate in left center field. Well, wouldn't you know it, later I had prostate cancer surgery, and that helped kind of solve that and bring two ends together. But the next day, I'm going up to the radio booth in Tacoma at Cheney Stadium, and this little girl, she's probably about 10 years old. She comes running over and she says, are you Jerry Howarth, the Twins radio announcer? I said, yes, I am. She said, my dad thinks you're hilarious. And I know what happens. He heard me call that prostate call the day before. And so that was one of a few where they come up. And I also learned at that particular time, you're going to make mistakes. They're going to happen. But the best thing is to move on from them. Don't dwell on them. And when you have them, try to make light of them as easy as you can in situations just like this.
So were there any major league interviews, players that were particularly enjoyable interviews? And were there any that were particularly a challenge to get an interview out of?
Well, I always enjoyed interviews, especially with people like Dave Winfield, who had great experiences and was very articulate. I love being around Roberto Alomar and so many others. Sean Green was another one of my favorite Blue Jays of all time, and they were players who were easy to talk to, and they made it fun. As far as other interviews, some go better than others, and you do the best you can. But I did have one great learning experience too, Jonathan, that I want to share with your audience. We were at Fenway Park. I think it was my second year, probably 1983. And I asked Carl Yastrzemski, the legendary Hall of Fame left fielder, if he would mind doing a pregame interview with me on the radio. He said, no, that'd be fine. So I had my tape recorder and I interviewed Carl. And it was probably the blandest 4-minute interview I ever did with anybody. But when I left, I said, thank you, Carl. He said, oh, no, you're more than welcome. And I left there and I paused and I said to myself, Jerry, not every major leaguer do you want to put on a pedestal. Instead, interview that person for who they are, not what you think they should be. And that taught me right then, there are going to be a lot of Carl Yastrzemskis and there are going to be a lot of Dave Winfields, but they are true to themselves. And Carl gave a very sincere interview, even without a lot of enthusiasm. But you know what? That's who he was. And that, again, was a very good educational tool for me to realize everybody's different. And then when you interview them or talk to them, appreciate that, rather than categorizing them in what you think they should be.
That's good. And as time starts to run short on us, we won't keep you too long here, Jerry. We appreciate all the time you have for us today. I wanted to ask you, though, on kind of that note about how to approach players as a broadcaster. You note in your book some of the relationships that you've had with players and coaches over the years. People like Paul Molitor, and I've seen a picture of you chatting with Mark Burley with Mark's glove on his head at spring training. And I know, especially at the professional level, that can be a complex thing, developing friendships with the players you call. because it's your job to be straight up in your calling of what they're doing on the field. What has been your philosophy and your outlook on developing those personal relationships with the players that you have to go upstairs and call their performance?
Well, when you mentioned Mark Burley, he was one of my favorite Blue Jays too. He was so personable and we got along great. And there are opportunities too on a broadcast where you have to be constructively critical. And even though that's your friend down there or somebody that you got to know and you really respect, if there's something that the audience needs to know that is going to border on being constructively critical, I think you do it. The one thing that I always said to broadcasters, and I applied this to myself for years and years, if you're going to be critical of a player, pretend that they're sitting right there to your left. And so that when you say something on the air about them that's critical, you're saying it to them right there in the booth. So that when they come to you the next day and say, Jerry, you said this about me, then you say, yes, I did. And this is why, X, Y, and Z, or whatever you want to call it. And at that particular point, I think you're being fair that way, as opposed to being condescending, talking down about somebody. They should have done this, they should have done that. Why didn't they do this? Or that was egregious, or whatever it happens to be. No, say it in a way that's diplomatic with them listening already. And now you've already said it to them. And I took great pride in doing that as well, even with friends that I had made over the years.
And one last thing, umpires. You made it through your major league career with an emphasis of not commenting on umpires' calls. And I know that can be a distraction for a lot of broadcasters, myself included, when I was younger. Where does that come from with you not commenting either way on umpires' calls?
That goes back to my 5 years in AAA and my very first year in Tacoma. I made it a point before every game to go in and visit with the umpires in their umpires' quarters. And by doing that, I saw them as real people, not umpires making calls. I saw and talked to them and basically interviewed them for 5 years. And many of them made the major leagues as I was able to make it. I also realized too that some of those calls are very difficult to make. And I think one thing that instant replay has showed, where you get basically the right call, is before instant replay, how tough those calls are to make. And these are professionals too. So I took great pride in allowing them to be professionals, but real human beings too. And I befriended all of them. And I wanted them to be the best that they could be. So I never took sides. And if there was a call made, I would say, well, let's see where it ends up as far as now the instant replay. Other than that, before that, I was never judgmental because I realized what a difficult profession they were in and how so easy it is to criticize. And I didn't want to do that because I didn't know if I was right either. And they're making the call, not me. So it was really getting to know them as real people and friends.
Oh, that's good. And it's time for one more break. We'll step aside for a second here for a commercial. We'll be back on the other side with our wrap up. And normally we say goodbye to our guest at the end of block number 2. But Jerry, I'm going to start something different this week. I make it a priority to try to do it straight up with the interviews. And of course, don't make yourself part of the interview. But I want to invite you on for our wrap up for 5 more good minutes. No script, no plan. Just 5 minutes with you, me, and a little red light still on. So we'll be back on the other side here on Behind the Mic on ASTV. And welcome back to Behind the Mic on ASTV, back for 5 more good minutes with our guest this week, Jerry Howarth. Jerry, that was an absolute blast. Going around the horn with you on the Blue Jays and your path in broadcasting, and Normally on this show, I say goodbye to the guest after block number 2 and then just do a quick wrap up. But I wanted to do it differently this week. As we alluded to throughout the show, you and I have had a special relationship for 12, 13 years now, and you're my day one baseball mentor, baseball friend. So I didn't want to sign off this one on my own. And I wanted to show you something. This is got all my baseball goodies tucked into one corner to make a good backdrop, and up here over my shoulder.
Look at that.
How about that? That's
you, me, and Bob Elliott.
And I guess just a little word on Bob, if you could, because the two of you, of course, Bob Elliott, the J.G. Taylor Spink award-winning writer out of Toronto, the two of you, the best way I could describe you two is together, you've basically been like my baseball dad. You on the broadcast side and Bob on the writing side. How great a friend has Bob been to you?
He's one of the best friends that I've ever made in my life, let alone in baseball, my career here. In fact, we just talked the other day. He'll call on occasion and we trade notes and go back and forth, and both in retirement. And I love Bob's heart. He's just a wonderful human being. Again, Bob enjoyed what he did for others. And whenever he wrote, he would reach out to somebody, and it just became something that was really a nice part of. We live in an ego-lending profession when you talk about sports and being in the media. But Bob doesn't have an ego. And I felt that I didn't have one either. You don't either. And when you get into an ego-lending profession and you don't have one, but you're there to make others' lives more enjoyable so that they say, hey, you're part of our family, whatever that happens to be, then you've done it the right way. And Bob Elliott does that too. He always has. It's not about him. And so we've shared many things over the years, and we go back and forth, and then he's talked to me about you too. And I've talked about you. And so we go back and forth with you and others as well. But I think you're one of the shining lights in both of our lives.
Well, one of the things that I tell people about remembering some of my interactions and experiences with you has been my opportunities to join you on the job a few different times at games. And at that point, I would come in just trying to be seen but not heard, and don't get in anybody's way, don't mess anything up. And I would step in there, and this is honest, I would step in there and you would be my ticket in, and my answer to everybody is, I'm here with Jerry. And with the entire Blue Jays crew, as soon as I said I'm with Jerry or I'm with Bob, I was in. And that's a reflection on the culture that you were ahead of in the Blue Jays broadcast crews. And I think first to somebody like Buck Martinez, who has been a friend to me more than once, just because I visited one day with you. I think about Joe Siddle. I think about Pat Tabler, who the first time I joined you in a press box, he came out behind the Sportsnet booth and talked to me about me. I wasn't talking about him. He was getting to know my path, and he wanted to know about my work with the Okotoks Dogs. And you're talking about having no egos, and that's, you guys are the leading example of that. So I wanted to thank you for that example.
Well, you are most welcome. And when I think of Pat and Buck and Joe and so many others that you've brought up here, when we got into the broadcast booth, we did our thing, and that was to broadcast. And I always told people, come in the booth. That's not going to affect me at all. I could have 10, 15 people in the radio booth at the Rogers Center, and it didn't affect at all what I was doing. In fact, it enhanced what I was doing rather than me broadcasting to everybody in that room. No, I was broadcasting to everybody in the listening audience as everybody was watching and listening like yourself. And that made it worthwhile for me too, where you were doing your thing, but you knew at the same time, you were really making a long lasting impression on somebody that they could use in their lives. And that was you with the broadcasters that you mentioned. And we all enjoyed doing that.
And it's been a wonderful experience, and it still sticks with me today. And when I told you off air, but one of the when ASTV came to me a number of months ago and talked to me about hosting a show, there's a different concept in mind. And I came back and said, you know what? What if I call up my sportscasting contacts and we just have shop talk type conversations and see where the conversation goes? Because I think that's a unique angle that hasn't been covered yet. And the idea, the inspiration for that came from you, because I would think back to the conversations that we've had and the conversations that I've had with others in the profession, and I just wanted to bring some of those to the wider audience. And I'm now in the place where I've had sportscasters, students, and younger sportscasters starting to come to me a little bit and ask me questions, and I'm thrilled and able to have those conversations. But the first thing that goes through my head every time is a feeling of, you don't want me, you want my friends.
Well, when I think of you, I didn't know much about spina bifida until I met you. You've been in a wheelchair your entire life. And when I met you at 16, I saw how difficult it was for you. And not that it's any easier now, but how you've dealt with this, I have the ultimate respect. You've made yourself a great life, and it hasn't been under easy circumstances. But talk about an inspiration for others. Jonathan, you are that for me, and I know so many others who have been around you as well. And I appreciate being on here today with you, and hopefully in another 12 or 15 years, we can do this again when I'm pushing 100.
Book it. All right.
Yeah, book it.
Jerry, thanks again.
You are welcome. Thanks for having me.
Before we sign off, we'll remind everybody that you can find all of our archives on the ASTV website, amateursports.tv, and also on our YouTube home. That's where you'll find archive playlists of all our shows and our live sports coverage from ASTV. And you can also follow us across the social media network, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We're with you every Friday night, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern, with a sportscaster. This week it has been Jerry Howarth, and we'll be back with you next week. So once again, Jonathan Hodgson for my friend and yours, Jerry Howarth. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next week.